Kei te whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. Haere nei. So your greens are costing you more green. Rising fuel prices and wild weather are not helping. We're on the farm with a grower. The government's expensive legal battle to keep a pregnant woman's husband out of MIQ. The debate over fizzy, sugary drinks in schools bubbles on, with another petition to Parliament calling for a ban and asking for unhealthy food to be outlawed in the playground. GPs will pick up Middlemore ED's overflow this long weekend, but what does a permanent solution look like? And the Tonga Rugby League fans so red hot with excitement they could explode. Check us out, Sky Channel 83.
RNZ News at 5 o'clock. Good afternoon, I'm Karen McCarthy. The government has spent $43,000 in a legal battle against a pregnant woman who was applying for an emergency MIQ spot for her husband. That's despite the case being abandoned shortly before it was due to be heard when MB granted emergency allocation. The woman, Aucklander Roshni Sami, was among at least 7 people to launch judicial reviews of MIQ decisions relating to pregnancy. She believes the money could have been better spent creating a fairer MIQ system.
My experience and the experience of all the women who've been through this is that we were soundly ignored by the government. We've never had a substantial response on the complaints that we've made or the issues that I raised.
The former COVID-19 response minister has apologised to pregnant journalist Charlotte Bellis, and Roshni Sami believes the other women are also owed an apology. The police admit they are facing an enormous task, identifying people suspected of criminal offending on Parliament grounds. Hundreds of anti-vax and anti-mandate protesters occupied Parliament's lawn for more than 3 weeks before being forcibly evicted on March the 2nd after lighting fires on the lawn. Jake McKee reports.
In 4 weeks, over February and March, 250 people were arrested. So far, 9 people have been prosecuted and action has been taken against 1 youth. Detective Inspector Paul Berry says photos of 15 people of interest have been released and the police want the public's help to find out who they are. He says investigators are combing through more than 15 terabytes of photographs and videos to identify anyone involved in violent criminal offending.
The Health Ministry has devised a plan to deal with a range of COVID scenarios, which could still include lockdowns as a last resort. The scenarios all deal with a variant more transmissible than Omicron. They are then ranked as to how effectively they can break through immunity and the severity of infection. The scenarios don't come with a specific response, but require baseline capacity for testing, tracing and vaccinating. COVID-19 Response Minister Aisha Verrill admits there is public interest around the likelihood of future lockdowns or border closures.
These measures are absolutely a last resort. We know that if we have strong underlying public health measures, that our need for more stringent measures is reduced.
The government is due to confirm tomorrow details around eligibility for a 4th vaccine dose. 3 students have been expelled from an Otago high school after another student was assaulted in a school bathroom. The incident at Otago Boys High School was filmed and widely circulated on social media. Acting Rector Andrew King says the school is helping police to identify those who shared the video. The victim has returned to school and is being supported. Lower Hutt's mayor is throwing his support behind a plan to replace Hutt Hospital's quake-prone main block with temporary wooden prefabs. An updated seismic assessment of the Tonga block has revealed it's only the concrete cladding that's quake-prone, but the building remains just 15% of the new building standard. Campbell Barry says he's happy with the plan tabled at the Health Board meeting today, but he says the community wants to see a clear plan with a set timeline for a permanent building on the site. A new Plymouth brew bar is turning off its taps 1 day a week to help prevent staff burnout after vacancies couldn't be filled. Unemployment in Taranaki is sitting at a record low 2.4%, the lowest jobless rate in the country. Co-owner of Shining Peak Brewing, Jesse Sigurdsson, says CVs have dried up and existing staff are suffering. A jury in California has found comedian Bill Cosby liable for sexually assaulting a woman at the Playboy Mansion in 1975 when she was a teenager. He's denied the allegations. The BBC's Wendy Urquhart reports.
Judith Hutt told the civil court that when Bill Cosby invited her and a friend to the Playboy Mansion in 1975, he forced her to perform a sex act. The civil court jury found Cosby guilty and awarded $500,000 in compensation. It's not the first time Cosby has faced accusations of sexual assault. He was jailed, then released last year when a court in Pennsylvania threw out his criminal conviction. California opened the statutes of limitation in order to try this case, but Cosby's lawyers are highly likely to file an appeal and challenge the opening of the statutes of limitation.
In sport, world champion lawn bowler Val Smith has been selected to attend her 5th Commonwealth Games in Birmingham. Smith will compete in the women's triple and fours alongside Taylor Bruce, Selena Goddard and Nicole Toomey. After winning a silver medal in Delhi in 2010 and bronze in Glasgow in 2014, Smith is looking to complete her medal set with a gold this year. She hopes to offer her young teammates a sense of calm at the pinnacle event.
I've seen all of these girls grow and develop in their sport, but I've also seen them grow and develop as people as well. It makes me feel very proud and privileged to be able to link up with them and play in something as big as the Commonwealth Games.
Bowls New Zealand named 10 athletes for the Games today. The Black Caps paceman Trent Boult concedes they didn't score enough runs in the second test against England, but he says their confidence is still high heading into the third and final match in Leeds, which starts tomorrow night. The 5-wicket defeat in the second match at Trent Bridge handed England an unassailable 2-0 lead. Boult admits the Black Caps haven't been at their best and says they are desperate to restore some pride in the final test.
It's hard being 2-0 down in the series, but there's a lot of pride in that changing room with some of the performances that we've put out over the last few years, and if we're fair, we probably haven't been to the standard that we want to be as a group, and it's nice to have one game left in the series to go out there and play there. We know we can.
The Black Caps have captain Kane Williamson back, but have lost fast bowler Kyle Jamieson to injury. That's the news.
Restricted drivers escape the harshest punishments.
Students are concerned because it is light-handed, because they don't think they will either get caught or be punished.
Remembering why planes avoid volcanic eruptions.
The cabin filled with smoke and the engines were engulfed in flames.
And scientists discover a very hairy crab that wears a sponge as a hat.
Apart from being extremely hairy, I sometimes think it looks like Boris on a bad hair day.
Soak it up. Morning reports, weekdays from 6 on RNZ National.
Lisa Owens here next with Checkpoint. That's after the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. For Northland and Auckland, mainly fine, isolated showers north of Auckland City. Waikato to Wellington, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Fine or becoming fine today, frosts for most places in the morning. Gisborne and the Wairoa district, cloudy, isolated showers, clearing by tomorrow afternoon, fine spells developing. For the remainder of Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, mostly cloudy today, areas of cloud and frost tomorrow morning, then fine. For all the South Island, mostly fine, however fog or low cloud persisting in a few inland valleys. Frosts tomorrow morning, severe about the high country, isolated showers for coastal Fiordland tomorrow and possibly northern Bulla tomorrow evening. The Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with the odd shower today, fine spells increasing tomorrow afternoon. It's coming up to 5:08.
Nā mihi Karen, tēnā koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki Checkpoint I tēnei rā, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. Growers have been forced to throw out hundreds of thousands of crops because wild weather has ruined them. The latest figures from Stats New Zealand show fruit and vegetables have gone up 10% in the past year. While that might seem like growers are getting themselves a bumper harvest, like consumers, they're feeling it in the pocket too, along with rising fuel prices and other production costs. There's also dwindling demand from restaurants and cafes that have shut up shop over the pandemic. Our reporter Louise Tanuth and camera operator Marika Habazi paid one of Auckland's largest growers a visit.
So we just cut them like this and then...
Alan Fong's family has been in the horticulture business for nearly 60 years. He says there's never been a more difficult time to be a grower.
I'm looking back when I was in my early 20s, and I can honestly say I'd rather back then than I do now.
We're here in Pukekawa at one of the fresh growers' several farms in the Franklin region. This one has 140 acres of lettuce and cauliflower. The sun's out today, but the ground's still sodden from recent weeks of rain. Wild weather's wiped out thousands of crops and left picking baskets empty and strewn across the fields.
Unfortunately, because of the excess rain, we've had a lot of bacterial disease come on, and that's why you see a lot of wastage there. So they're unsaleable, they're not marketable. So we're moving on to the next planting. So there's quite a few 100,000 lettuces here, unfortunately, that we have to bypass.
Everything is hand-picked before it's washed, packaged and transported to supermarkets or home delivery food boxes. Very little of their crop is exported nowadays. A few years ago, many of their buyers were in hospitality, but COVID took almost all of their clients.
We basically lost up to between 80 and 100% of our food service business, which means cafes, restaurants, hotels. So that tourism business was really decimated, and like all other industries associated with that. I mean, when a cafe or a restaurant fails, that in turn impacts on us.
And they desperately need more staff for harvesting. Alan says they've been trying to fill roles with little success.
Fewer people applying, or next to nothing applying, in fact. So because our crops are planted and harvested weekly, we've experienced quite often periods this last 2 years where we have had a lot of crop waste because we just can't take the crop off the fields.
They've got dozens of vehicles which they rely on for harvesting, spraying crops and transporting them to retailers. All the vehicles run on diesel, which has gone up about 50 cents a litre since January. That's not something they can cut back on, but they're now experimenting with using less fertiliser. Costs are increasing dramatically.
Fertilisers between 60 and 80% increase this year. Crop protection products like fungicides and things like that, probably anything from 25 to 30% increase. So diesel about up to 25% increase. So these are all impacted on us. Our freight rates have gone up because of the diesel surcharges.
Despite many shoppers assuming growers are putting up their prices due to these overheads, that's not the case here.
Not many industries out there can actually price gouge unless they're in a monopoly situation, and we certainly are not that. Our prices out of our gate are actually the same or lower than 2 years ago right now.
But absorbing all the rising costs doesn't come without consequences.
Our only option is to reduce our production.
And that means there's less supply on shelves, which can be why the price of your favourite veg is costing you more at the checkout. At 65, Alan's looking at slowing down in the future. When he does, his children will take the reins. While it's particularly tough at the moment, he's got faith in them.
The younger generation, whether they're our generation or other people, other families, they're resilient, they're smart, they'll get there.
It is 12 minutes past 5. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. This long weekend, some GPs in South and East Auckland will be taking up the slack for Middlemore's slammed emergency department, staying open longer and providing some free appointments. The DHB initiative follows the death of a woman who left ED because of long wait times, only to return critically ill. But a lot of GPs are under the pump and short-staffed too. And East Auckland, with a population of more than 100,000 people, doesn't have a single 24/7 healthcare centre after County's Manukau DHB cut funding for the East Care overnight service several years ago. The clinic's run by Care Group and its Chief Executive Benedict Hefford joins us now. Kia ora, Benedict.
Kia ora, Lisa.
So you've got 6 clinics under your umbrella, I understand. What kind of demand are you seeing at the moment?
Look, I think under the pump is the right wording is used there. We've got a perfect storm at the moment, which I think pretty much everyone saw coming, which is, we've got the normal winter demand plus the kind of 3 years worth of flu. We've still got COVID, and there's an awful lot of people out there that haven't had kind of what would have been elective procedures or screening, which is now turning much more urgent. So there's certainly a lot of demand, and at the same time, of course, we've got the same workforce shortages and issues that everyone has in the health sector.
How many staff down do you reckon you are, Benedict?
Sorry, say again?
How many staff down do you think you would be?
Well, at any point, we're about 15% down, and and that's a mixture of just normal what's become normal shortages because the borders are still partially closed and we've got those kind of pressures. But also, of course, clinical staff get sick just like everyone else and have to isolate because of COVID and those kinds of things. So it is pretty tough. But I think, we saw this coming. We prepared for it. And at the East Care Centre, for example, we've changed the process in the clinic around, and we've made sure that the first person someone sees when they come in is a nurse, so they can triage and make sure that they're safe and the next useful thing will happen. And we've separated out the waiting rooms, and we're using different kinds of staff as well because doctors are in such high demand. We're using nurse practitioners, nurse prescribers, even advanced paramedics. So, we've organised ourselves quite well. So it's safe and we're delivering, but it's not the service we want to provide. We really should have resourced. The whole system should have been resourced up for this winter well in advance of this happening because, as I say, it was all pretty predictable.
So, Benedict, what would that look like then? Would the East Care Clinic be open 24/7 if indeed it had been resourced up, as you say?
I think overnight coverage is certainly something that should have been looked at. It was many years back when those decisions were made about overnight care, and by all accounts, Middlemore ED has gone from being quite quiet, in sort of the middle of the night to actually under pressure almost all the time. So I think that would have been looked at. But, even more basic things. We had all that infrastructure around vaccinations after the COVID vaccine rollout. That could have been directed towards a flu vaccination campaign. Free flu vaccinations wouldn't have cost a huge amount of money and would have made a big difference. It feels to me that there's a lack of kind of national and regional leadership that's gone on here at the top of the health system in terms of just thinking a little bit further ahead and being proactive and trusting providers to deliver. I mean, we're the ones that are connected to communities and to patients. We see them every day. So, and certainly saw that with COVID as well.
Do you think there is
a lot of things that could have happened that haven't now? So.
Do you think there is enough stress on the system, and I mean at Middlemore's ED and also on GPs, because, some people are having to wait to get in to see their GP. Do you think there's enough stress on the system to warrant funding for clinics 24/7 during the winter months at the very least?
I certainly think that, if you go back before COVID, there was a lot of planning that was done across Auckland in particular, which basically said, at about this time we were going to be severely short on acute hospital capacity, EDs and beds, and so what's happening now isn't a surprise. I think the last couple of years of COVID have sort of kept a damper on things because the things that we do to stop COVID also stop flu and lots of other illnesses. So it's all catching up with us now. So yes, I think there is probably a whole mixture of things that we need to do or should have been done to meet this issue. And certainly at East Care, we would love to see the overnight service reinstated. It was a very regretful decision to have to close that, and the need now is quite great in the community. So it's certainly something that needs to be looked at. But the real issues are funding of primary and urgent care, closing that disparity between what happens in DHBs for DHB staff and what happens to the community staff, looking at the immigration settings. And I don't understand why we still have border restrictions. We're competing with Australia and they've had that all gone for months now. So there's a whole lot of policy issues that really need to be worked through. But certainly overnight care and extended urgent care is one of them.
Thank you for joining us this evening. That's Benedict Hefford, who is the Care Group's CEO. It is 19 minutes past 5. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The streets of South Auckland are turning red this week as Tonga's National Rugby League team returns to action against their New Zealand rivals. Tongan fans have become renowned for their wild support of their teams, and Saturday's doubleheader at Mount Smart Stadium is expected to be no different. A community event to ramp up the excitement is being held at the Otago Rugby League Club this afternoon. And joining us now from the event is sports reporter Clay Wilson. So Clay, how is it going on there if you can hear me with the crowd in the background?
Barely can hear you, Lisa. As those that are listening will be able to hear and those that are watching will be able to see, there's a lot happening here. It's a bit of an understatement to say these Tongan fans are excited about these games on Saturday. Since about 3:30 this afternoon, the fans have been rolling in here at the Otago Rugby League Club. A lot of music, some giveaways, chanting, all that kind of thing, getting the crowd hyped up. We've had all 4 teams up on stage, even some of the players dancing, getting the crowd worked up. Not that these fans, as people will know from previous years, these Tongan fans really love their rugby league teams. We've had 3 or 4 big games here in the last 4 or 5 years, which have just turned out massive crowds. And as you said in your intro, the streets are turning red, and they very much are in this part of Auckland tonight, and they will do as the week goes on. So it's only Wednesday. We've got these games on Saturday, but definitely, a lot of excitement among these fans.
Yeah, and you've got an enthusiastic one off your left shoulder there, young fan, Clay, waving out to the crowd. So how big a deal is this?
Well, I think the scale of this event 4 days out from the game just shows you how important this game is, especially to the Tongan community. But you have to remember this Kiwi Ferns team haven't played for 18 months, 2 years as well. So important just for sports fans, for rugby league fans to have a huge event like this. I just spoke to organisers earlier. It sounds like the Mount Smart Stadium is about 95% capacity already, so it's going to be another sellout, a sea of red, but there'll be a lot of Kiwi fans there to enjoy that as well. So I think that just shows how important it is to this community, but to the rugby league, the sports community as well.
Thanks, Clay. Clay Wilson joining us live there from the Otago Rugby League Club. And homai o whakaaro, we would love your feedback on anything you've heard on the program this evening. Get in touch about the price of vegetables. We were talking earlier in the program about how fuel costs and wild weather have added to production costs for growers. What are you seeing at the store, and how are you managing with rising prices? Also keen to hear your thoughts on whether there needs to be a 24/7 healthcare clinic in East Auckland or somewhere, maybe out south, to take the heat off Middlemore on a long-term basis. Get in touch. 2101 on text. You can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or you can Facebook us at Checkpoint, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Let's get to the headlines now. Ko Karen Arnold tēnei.
The government has spent $43,000 in a legal battle against a pregnant woman who was applying for an emergency MIQ spot for her husband. That's despite the case being abandoned shortly before it was due to be heard when MB granted emergency allocation. The woman, Aucklander Roshni Sami, was among at least 7 people to launch judicial reviews of MIQ decisions relating to pregnancy. An Auckland vegetable grower is considering culling some of his crop due to rising production costs. Storms have ruined many plants, and rising fuel prices are making harvesting machines more expensive to run. Alan Fong from The Fresh Grower says those aren't the only increased costs producers are facing. Mate Maa Tonga fans in Otago have come out in full force to rally behind their rugby league representatives before the test matches on Saturday. Both the men's and women's sides will meet their New Zealand counterparts. The Public Transport Users Association says the decision to cut the Onehunga rail line is idiotic. From Friday, Onehunga train services will stop at Newmarket, and passengers will have to take another train line or bus to Britomart in the CBD under City Rail Link plans. And the Health Ministry has come up with a new plan to deal with a range of COVID scenarios, from best to worst case, which could still include lockdowns as a last resort. The scenarios all deal with a variant more transmissible than Omicron. Those are the headlines.
Kia ora e ho. The government spent tens of thousands of dollars in a legal battle against a pregnant woman who was applying for an emergency MIQ spot for her husband. Roshni Sami was trying to get her husband to New Zealand before she gave birth. But just a day before the case was to be heard in the High Court, MB changed its mind and granted her husband a room. But the government spent $43,000 in the process, and our reporter Katie Todd joins me now to explain. So Katie, why did Roshni Sami go to court?
Well, this all starts sort of mid-last year. Roshni Sami found out she was pregnant. She was in Auckland, but her husband was in the US and he'd gone there for work. His name was Walter Spears. They tried via the MIQ lottery to get him a spot to come home and support her throughout the last trimester and also when she gave birth in December. They missed out. He landed something like 24,000 in the queue. So they applied for an emergency space via emergency allocation. That was also declined, so they applied again. This whole time, Roshni's becoming really stressed and her midwife is getting worried about the health of the baby. So she decided to kind of take a shortcut and go to the High Court and try and get a judicial review of MIQ's decision. So that was due to take place on October 26th. Then on October 22nd, the last sort of business day before it, Roshni and her husband got an email saying he had actually been granted emergency allocation. So that brought the court case to an end. It's actually not clear why the allocation was granted, given the first one was rejected and their circumstances hadn't actually changed.
Yeah, and that's probably a story some people are familiar with. So what do the documents show?
Yeah, so Roshni's lawyer, Tudor Clee, filed an OAA request. He wanted a record of the legal costs incurred by MB as it prepared for the hearing. It says it spent just shy of $43,000 on this case. It does say the matter was dealt with in an urgent time frame, so the legal costs were higher than other similar cases. But I talked to Roshni Sami today. She told me the government could have spent this money on plenty of other things, including making a more fair system for people like her. Here's what she had to say.
The policy was so badly written that it couldn't accommodate pregnancy. The people that implemented it, like Megan Main and the other leaders that came after her, were very unsympathetic and did not have an understanding of the risks of pregnancy. At any moment, an emergency can happen, right? And you need your family.
And you could hear Roshni's baby in the background there. So tell us, were there some other similar cases?
Yeah, as Roshni hinted at there were plenty of others. I have data from October 2020 to October 2021. In that time, 229 people applied for emergency MIQ allocation where they mentioned pregnancy as their reason. By October 2021, just 23 of those had actually been approved. A lot of people who were rejected sought legal representation. Tudor Clee represented 35 couples in total. Some of them were pregnant themselves and wanting to return home, and others were like Roshni wanting support. Now, Tudor Clee says 7 filed judicial reviews in court, including Roshni. 4 had their emergency allocations granted immediately prior to the hearing, like Roshni. 2 got lottery spots, so they abandoned the court cases because of that. 1 ran out of time before the hearing. She ended up giving birth alone in Australia prematurely.
Okay, so do we know what the costs were associated with all that legal wrangling?
No, we don't know for sure. We do know that MB spent at least another $3,900 on one in October, and then in December, February and March, it gave a total of $21,000 for some cases that it heard then. That figure was also provided as part of this OAA request. But Tudor Clee says there could be other expenses that aren't in this scope, so there might be others we don't know about.
Thanks, Katie. That's Katie Todd on that story regarding the pregnant woman who was taking the government to court over not allocating her husband an MIQ spot. Meanwhile, after months of legal wrangling, the former COVID-19 minister has been forced into making a public apology to the journalist Charlotte Bellis. In a statement, Chris Hipkins has admitted he released incorrect information earlier this year about Ms Bellis's efforts to secure a spot in MIQ. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
Chris Hipkins has left his COVID portfolio behind. Now he wants to put this Charlotte Bellis saga in the past too.
We've concluded the matter. I've conveyed to her privately and now publicly my apology, and she's indicated she wants to leave it at that, and I'm happy to do that too.
A public apology to put the matter to bed. It stretches back to January when Charlotte Bellis went public with her plight. A New Zealand journalist denied emergency access to MIQ despite being pregnant in Afghanistan.
Pregnant New Zealand journalist says she's had to turn to the Taliban for help after being denied entry to her home country, New Zealand.
As the story hit headlines worldwide, the government went into damage control. Officials were ordered to take another look and ultimately did offer Ms Bellis an MIQ spot. Mr Hipkins, though, issued a statement at the time which cast a different light on Ms Bellis's story. He claimed the journalist had twice been offered consular assistance while in Afghanistan and had failed to respond. It unleashed a torrent of abuse online as social media users accused Ms Bellis of misrepresenting her position. But it wasn't her doing the misrepresenting. Mr Hipkins now admits his statement was wrong. Furthermore, he says Ms Bellis's application for MIQ had been deactivated in error.
Right at the beginning, clearly there are a few things that got lost in communication, lost in translation, and I do regret that, and so my apology in that sense is a very genuine one.
Mr Hipkins made a private apology in March, but has been in negotiations since over the wording of his public apology, a request from Ms Bellis's lawyer. She ultimately did not seek any financial compensation.
I wish her well.
Ms Bellis turned down an interview request today, but in a statement thanked the minister for his apology and said she stood by the decision to speak out. The opposition parties say it does not end here.
What about the inhumane nature of MIQ overall?
Don't just apologise to Charlotte Bellis. I think the government owes other grounded Kiwis an apology as well.
The High Court in April ruled aspects of the MIQ system were unjust. The combination of the virtual lottery system and narrow emergency criteria infringed on the rights of New Zealanders to return home freely. This week, the government confirmed it would not appeal the judgment. But a Grounded Kiwis spokesperson, Martin Newell, says they'd appreciate an apology too.
It's just been a general unwillingness to accept or take on board any criticism of MIQ and look at how they can make it better. Just say sorry and then we can all move on.
But that's easier said than done. The Prime Minister unwilling to go that far.
A lot of people paid a heavy price, but on behalf of others. And so we want to make sure that everyone affected knows that we always acknowledge that. We knew that we asked a lot of them, but it was important as part of our response.
Charlotte Bellis may have got an apology, but others abroad look like they'll be left waiting.
It's 28 minutes to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. It's time for the business news now. Ko taku hoa in Naianei, called Nicholas Poynton, who joins me in the studio. Let's start with Fletcher Building, Nicholas. It says that the plasterboard market's going to, come right in 4 months' time.
Yeah, the word they used is reach equilibrium come October, and what that means from them is that the supply will increase by 10%. In some documents they released ahead of their annual investor day this morning, they pointed to things like the reconfiguration of their factories. They're looking to increase imports. The removal removing royalties from trademarks to help other people bring in more foreign plasterboard products from overseas. They say that this taken together will help sort of boost supply in the coming months. But look, it's very hard to say if that will actually make any meaningful difference given the massive backlog that we've heard from people in the industry. And I think just like looking at, this is a 91-page presentation that was put out in the NZX this morning, 91 slides, part of this, a PowerPoint presentation. 2 slides were dedicated to this whole plasterboard debacle. And I couldn't help but looking through it, that is some of the clearest and concise communication we've had from Fletcher over this whole thing. Like, I know you've had the chance to look at that document and also speak to Ross Taylor, but we kind of saw quite clearly how Fletcher's is seeing this whole situation. They sort of ran through how the plasterboard market got to this point from their point of view, saying that back in August, they were actually adequately supplying demand at that time. Things all changed when we had the Auckland lockdown. That said, that led to a number of people in the industry bringing forward their orders. That led to stockpiling. The line they used was order volumes doubled through November 2021 to February 2022. That was approximately twice what the industry actually had the capacity to build. We've heard that from Fletcher's before. They've repeatedly pointed the finger at the stockpiling. One other item that was announced today, though, was that Placemakers and its other merchant customers will run and I quote here, an emergency allocation fund to alleviate smaller customer hardship issues.
How do you get an emergency allocation? Did they make that clear?
I'm not entirely...
Yeah, that's one of the issues that builders have raised, right? So they're not always at the front of the queue when the merchant is handing the goodies out.
Yeah, and I'm not entirely sure what that actually consists of. So, look, a lack of detail. Look, I'm sure we can clarify that with Fletcher's. But look, it's been hard to get information from them out about this. They did reiterate that point that they have the new plasterboard factory. It was delayed. Hope to have that up and running by next May. That should add an extra 30% of supply to the plasterboard market.
Yeah, well, interesting detail today. And Nicholas, this next story makes my toes curl up. Women could be $300,000 worse off come retirement compared to men.
Yeah, this is probably a story some people probably haven't heard. This is not the first time that they've heard this story. This was some research that was commissioned by the KiwiSaver provider, Kiwi Wealth, done for them by the New Zealand Institute of Economic Research. And looking at KiwiSaver, what they found that was the setbacks of motherhood combined with the gender pay gap suggests that women were about $318,000 worse off than men. Look, obviously there's some variations in what that final figure would be, but the numbers themselves are absolutely shocking. Kiwi Wealth, made some comments about how this is unacceptable, this can't happen. They said that they're going to take some of these findings, it's going to inform their own employment policies within their business. But people probably shouldn't have to rely on the goodwill of their employers to help address these clear gaps in the system. One of the things that the report highlights is that they put forward some possible solutions that could include the continuation of payments during maternity and parental leave, a real crackdown on the gender pay gap, and maybe even helping to improve the financial confidence of women. Because what this report found was that some women found themselves in the wrong type of fund given where they were in their lives. But look, truly an alarming report, and you'd really hope to see some more action to help address this.
And Nicholas, what numbers have you got for us today?
The NZX was on track for a pretty strong day before turning sharply in the last hour. The market closed down 23 points to 10,679. The dollar trading at 62.6 US cents, 90.5 Australian, and 51.2 British pence.
Thanks, Nicholas. Ka kite. Nicholas Poynton there with business news. A petition calling for sugary drinks to be banned from all New Zealand schools has gone to Parliament. The group behind it, Health Coalition Aotearoa, also wants new rules forcing schools in Kura to supply only healthy food. Right now, there's nutritional guidelines, no hard and fast rules. And the government's considering a drinks ban, but only for primary schools. Now, this petition isn't a first attempt. Health Coalition Aotearoa's chair, Professor Boyd Swinburne, joins us now. Boyd, you must feel like you're bashing your head against the brick wall somewhat.
It's been going on for a while, hasn't it, Lisa? Trying to get healthy food in schools. You'd think it'd be a no-brainer. Everybody wants their kids to be healthy and well and not end up with obesity and rotten teeth and to do well at school, but getting healthy food has been a long challenge.
So why is no one listening?
Well, I think this is a real opportunity now because the government is shifting to a regulation under the Education Act, and I think they should be picking the most important target, which is food and drinks in both primary and secondary schools, not just going for the easiest and weakest target. I mean, we know that, like primary schools, for example, already 2/3 of them are water and milk only, so it's not going to have very much impact compared to if they cover all schools.
Can you put it in perspective for us, Boyd? How much of sugar consumption in young people is from drinks that they're consuming?
Well, it's a bit hard to know because we haven't had a nutrition survey in children since 2002, if you can believe it. So a lot of that's guesswork, but a reasonable proportion of sugar does come from sugary drinks, estimated to be about 26%. But really, we don't have strong data on that.
So if they were to ban the fizzy drinks, the sugary drinks in schools, like let's talk about secondary schools because you want it to cover them as well. What stops the kids from just going to the dairy before or after class?
Well, that's true, and that's always the problem with some policies. They're not totally encompassing, but at least within the school, when the school curriculum is teaching about healthy food, the school canteen should match it. And I know it won't be perfect, but it will be an awfully good step. You know, schools are a bit of a lighthouse. What happens in practice there does shine out beyond the school gates into homes and so on, and it's one way of modelling healthy behaviours, and healthy food environments.
So in terms of the healthy foods rules that you want, would that be food that the school sells and or supplies to kids, like at the tuck shop, or if they're supplying meals, they have to be healthy?
Yes, that's true. It's not food that children bring from school, bring to school from home, rather. It's about what is supplied by the schools or sold. So, this is a really important first step. Some schools have gone much further and said only healthy food brought in from schools, but let's do this one step at a time at least.
So, okay, what would be out at the school tuck shop then if you had your way?
Well, I mean, the most is 7 out of the 10 most popular food items or most commonly served food items in schools are unhealthy food. So a lot of pastry foods and sausages, there's ice creams and ice blocks, flavoured milk, drinking yogurts, sweet snacks, biscuits, those sorts of things. The types of things that we know are problematic for health.
Really appreciate your time, Boyd. That's Professor Boyd Swinburne there from the Health Coalition Aotearoa. Let us know your thoughts on that one. Text us on 2101 or tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. It is 20 to 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. So you heard there the Health Coalition Aotearoa wants a sugary drinks ban across all schools in New Zealand, not just primary schools, which the government is looking at, and also outlawing food that's considered not healthy at the tuck shop. And as they were saying there, fried foods, pastries, sausages, ice creams and sweet snacks. What do you reckon? Text us 2101 or you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ. Time to get to the headlines now. Ko Karen Anō tēnei.
The government has spent $43,000 in a legal battle against pregnant woman Roshni Sami, who was applying for an emergency MIQ spot for her husband, only for MB to grant the exemption and abandon the case. Meanwhile, after months of legal wrangling, the former COVID-19 minister has been forced into making a public apology to the journalist Charlotte Bellis. But the opposition parties say the government needs to apologise to all New Zealanders who grappled with MIQ, not just Charlotte Bellis. A building industry leader says businesses will fail as they wait for plasterboard. Fletcher Building expects supply will increase by 10% in the next 4 months, and it's setting up an emergency allocation. But Building Supplies Cooperative Chair Carl Taylor says businesses cannot wait, and there are still shortages of other materials, including roofing and windows. A new Plymouth brew bar is turning off its taps 1 day a week to help prevent staff burnout after vacancies couldn't be filled. Co-owner of Shining Peak Brewing, Jesse Sigurdsson, says CVs have dried up and existing staff are suffering. And some GPs in South and East Auckland will be taking up the slack for Middlemore's slammed emergency department over the long weekend by staying open longer and providing some free appointments. The boss of East Care, Benedict Hefford, told Checkpoint he would love to see funding to reopen the clinic's overnight service. Middlemore is currently the only 24/7 care available. Those are the headlines.
Thanks, Karen. It's not just missing plasterboard halting construction on sites around New Zealand. Roofing, windows and even screws are harder to get and come at an inflated price. And with added labour shortages, it's enough to see some businesses crumble. Sam Ollie reports.
Building Supplies Cooperative Chair Carl Taylor is receiving distress calls from builders unable to do the work to get paid.
I don't think we're months away. I think we're days away before we really see a bit of a tsunami in some of the smaller builders hitting the wall, and purely because they just can't get materials.
According to the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment, 115 building companies have gone into liquidation so far this year. Businesses are venting frustrations on Facebook. Mr. Taylor says one builder's post struck a chord.
He's got his house ready for Jibboard, and he hopes to be back on site before Christmas with Jibboard. If not, his words were he doesn't believe he'll be in business by then. I'm starting to see a lot of that kind of thing across social media.
He drove around subdivisions in Christchurch last week, gone quiet.
In one subdivision alone, I counted 19 houses waiting for either bricks, windows or Jibboard, and they've all been sitting at that stage for a number of weeks. There will be cash flow issues.
Master Builders President Kerry Archer says it's a perfect storm hitting the construction industry that desperately wants to ease the housing crisis.
We can't get the staff to do it. We can't get the materials to do it. The whole industry is just under an immense amount of pressure. And that's coming through in lots of different things. You know, the mental health side of the industry is terrible at the moment. The highest suicide rate of any industry in New Zealand. We've got failures starting to happen, businesses.
Product retailers like Whangare's Renovation Warehouse are doing their best, but even the smallest essentials like brackets and screws are hard to come by. Salesman Oliver Wilkinson says there aren't enough building materials approved for use in New Zealand, there are shipping delays, and manufacturers on our shores can't always get enough staff to keep production up. Even when people can buy what they need, prices are through the roof.
Every 3 months you're just bang, 10%, 10%, 10%, 10%. So 2 years post-COVID you might have had 100% price increases on a lot of stuff, and that's if you can get it. Anything you can get does tend to disappear.
Mr. Wilkinson calls it crazy.
In a year, one of our guys, Rod, that guy down there, it was his 1 year anniversary working here last year, and the price of our lowest grade apply has doubled from about 23 a sheet to 42 a sheet.
The warehouse is still waiting on plywood orders placed last September. Oliver Wilkinson's calling 10 timber mills a day to check for supplies, constantly scrounging to fill shelves. Customers are calling too, even for products the warehouse doesn't sell.
Every day we get sort of 30, 40 emails from all throughout New Zealand for just anything you can think of, and then phone calls on top. Like for a while we're getting 30 jib calls a day and people coming in, where's jib, where's jib, where's jib?
And you don't sell jib?
No, we don't.
Fletcher Building expects plasterboard supply will increase by 10% in the next 4 months. It will run an emergency allocation fund. It's reconfigured its factory and has increased imports and issued royalty-free licences to 10 parties to import foreign-made plasterboard. The Commerce Commission's doing a year-long study on residential building supplies in Aotearoa and will publish findings in December.
Wooden prefabricated buildings are being considered as a temporary replacement for the quake-prone Hutt Hospital. An updated seismic assessment of the Tonga block last week revealed it is only the concrete cladding that's quake-prone, but that doesn't change its dire seismic rating at just 15% of new building standard. Ruth Hill reports.
As an immediate measure to protect the public from chunks of falling concrete in an earthquake, the DHB has put fencing around the 7-storey building. The head of provider services at Capital and Coast and Hutt Valley, Joy Fairley, told board members today that's not a permanent fix and there is no capacity to shift services elsewhere. The building provides a quarter of the region's adult beds and all the Hutt's medical and surgical inpatient beds, children and maternity, as well as radiology and lab services.
The reason why we have to look at creating capacity in the medium term is that if we are looking at a new master site plan to bring forward development of Tonga, clearly that building has to be empty. And secondly, even if we were able to remediate some of the Tonga, and we are still doing the work around that, clearly that building has to be vacant to do the remediation.
The proposal is to put a single-storey building on top of the existing emergency department, car park and roadway, or construct a double-storey prefab over the car park and roadway. Last month, shocked board members were told the building had major structural problems and was rated at just 15% of the new building code. However, after a peer review and reassessment by the same engineering firm, many ratings dramatically increased. For instance, the stairs went from 15% to 60%. For Hutt board members, this is not particularly reassuring. Josh Briggs, who's also a Hutt City Councillor, queried how such a low rating could magically change almost overnight, with no intervention except some colleagues having a conversation about it.
There's either some misguidance or misdirection or incompetency or something wasn't done thoroughly enough. There's such a drastic change when we were told that wouldn't occur.
Board Chair David Small admitted he too was surprised by the change, but assured members it didn't mean they were treating the matter with any less urgency.
So we're not at the stage of saying, well, because the results are less alarming, we're going to slow down. We're moving at full speed to work through the options and the plan.
Josh Briggs disagreed, pointing out that board papers and public statements clearly said vacating the building could now be done over a longer time frame, and that worries him. Joy Fairley responded, saying moving patients and services prematurely would actually put them at higher risk.
We have an emergency decanting plan, which is not sustainable, and what that clearly demonstrated is there is no palatable decanting plan without creating additional capacity. And the risk to patients and our community of acting on the emergency plan as a long-term option is much higher than moving through looking at different capacity.
Consulting firm Distravis will cost out the plans for the prefabs next month, with construction set to take 6 to 12 months. Hutt City Mayor Campbell Barry is welcoming the plan, saying any decision that ensures services will stay in the Hutt Valley in the short to medium term is a good one.
The devil will be in the detail. I think all of us would expect that this isn't a long-term solution to healthcare services in the Hutt. It is simply to enable those services to continue to get out of that building, the Hiratonga block, over time.
Mr Barry says long-term the community needs a clear plan, budget and timeline for a permanent building on the site. The final decision on what happens next at Hutt Hospital rests with Health New Zealand, which will take over from district health boards next week.
It's 10 to 6. Kia mau tonu mai. Stay with us. You're listening to Checkpoint on RNZ National. Taranaki businesses are thinking outside of the box as they struggle to fill vacancies and hold on to staff. Some employers are throwing open days to attract staff, while others are offering incentives and going the extra mile to keep the kaimahi they've already got. Our Taranaki Whanganui reporter Robin Martin has more.
Unemployment in Taranaki is sitting at a record low 2.4%. It's the lowest jobless rate in the country. General Manager at the New Plymouth Novotel, Jayesh Bala, says that's meant it's been nigh on impossible to fill crucial roles in food and beverage and housekeeping. He came up with the idea of offering a behind-the-scenes look at the business to attract new staff.
Most things in our industry can be trained, so as long as they've got the right attitude, we will take them on board. So our catch cry was just, no skills required, no experience required, come down, have a chat with us.
Jayesh Bala says it's worked a treat.
So we sat down, we met with everybody, but we also took them into the restaurant and into housekeeping, into a guest room, and took them through what they would be doing in that role. And for some people it was like, oh, okay, this is not for me, and then it was the end of it, and some people go, yep, we want to stay and have it and talk more about it. And then those people, we sort of went down the track and recruited them.
Lorraine Anderson took a job in housekeeping. She's a degree-qualified early childhood educator looking for a change. And she reckons the open day was a great idea.
I think it was really cool because, there's a lot of people meeting there that have the same kind of goal, which is to be employed. So it took a little bit of pressure off, and I wasn't so nervous like you go into an interview,
She enjoyed getting a concrete insight into what the job looks like.
So they took us up to the rooms, just yarned about what we would be doing, and gave us an overview of what the job would look like if we were to be in housekeeping. But there was a few roles advertised that day, but housekeeping fits me because I love cleaning.
The Novotel found staff for all 6 roles it was looking to fill. Co-owner of Shining Peak Brewing, Jesse Sigurdsson, has had no such luck at his bar and restaurant.
So we normally have quite a high turnover
because it's hospitality and that's standard across the industry. But we're just not seeing the CVs coming in. Yeah, it's just it's been tough. It's just been people leaving like normal, but people not coming.
He's had to close 1 day a week to prevent staff burnout.
It's entirely because of the staff shortage. We had our front of house especially, but the same with kitchen. Guys just doing way too many hours, and they're still doing it positively and with a smile on their face. But when you see the hours come in on their timesheets, you see the hours they're putting in, we just kind of had no choice but to close for 1 day. So.
General Manager of the Kings and Queens Hotel Suites, Daniel Fleming, is dangling a different kind of carrot to retain staff. Bonuses in the form of supermarket and fuel vouchers.
Where they can share in the success of the hotel. If there's something that we're able to achieve over budget, then they can actually get part of that as recognition and reward. And that's across the board. It doesn't matter if you're a public area tenant or working in housekeeping or front office.
Daniel Fleming says it will become increasingly difficult to compete on pay, and businesses will have to come up with innovative and fun ways to retain staff. The Taranaki Chamber of Commerce says the hospitality sector in the province has been hit hard by the inability of overseas students to travel to New Zealand. It expects the situation to ease ahead of the 2023 academic year.
The country is preparing to observe Matariki as a public holiday for the first time on Friday. But celebrations aren't limited to just Aotearoa. Some Kiwis living overseas who might be feeling a bit homesick have organised their own festivities to mark Matariki. Our reporter Ashley McCall spoke with different ropu across the globe.
Ha piripiri ana ngā tamariki a papatū anu I te pohua huru mō wai o te ukai.
It's a 4 a.m. start for Tā Ukaipo Māori Club in Newcastle on Friday, where they'll gather at a coastal lookout to catch a glimpse of the Matariki star cluster. The hour-long service will include karakia along with the calming sounds of Tonga Puoro. Organiser Rayana Potapu wanted to keep everything as traditional as possible and emphasised the importance of first consulting with tangata whenua, the local Awabakal tribe.
We were going to go up onto one of our favourite maunga to do this service, but the maunga that we had chosen is actually sacred. It's a sacred men's initiation maunga where women and children aren't actually allowed. So I thought that was phenomenal. We're trying our best to do and respect our culture, but the people of this whenua, we might have disrespected them by going up to that maunga.
Cultural advisor Luke Russell from Awabakal has been guiding Te Ukaipo through the laws of his tribe. He says the area he picked for the service has great significance with Aotearoa.
A couple of years ago, they put a walk along the top of that cliff top, like a boarded walk, and it's a memorial for all people who have served in the wars under that Anzac banner. So their names are scattered across big cutout steel, sculptures up there too.
Going further afield to Memphis, Tennessee, where Amelia Butler plans to share Matariki with her husband's American whānau. Her daughters, Bria and Aria, are not only Māori, but also come from the Fulani tribe in West Africa and the Native American tribes Blackfoot and Tokta. Amelia and her girls are excited to share more about what Matariki means to their whānau.
I'm going to make some fry bread for them and, sharing through food and creating those conversations through the vehicle of just sharing kai, sharing the stars, the crafts that we make for them. Because I think, part of it too is like talking to them more about their whānau, their family heritage.
Amelia runs a website called Learn Māori Abroad and will be hosting an educational event and launching a Matariki scholarship to help Māori overseas. Some of the students she teaches include members from Ngāti Rānana, which is a London-based group for Māori living in the UK. Chair Charlie Panapa says they'll be celebrating 65 years in July and will be celebrating Matariki by throwing a ball on Saturday for everyone.
We've got a couple of live performances happening. There's a dance company from Ōtautahi called Jolt, and they're doing a contemporary dance performance at our ball. And as well as that, we have a singer named Jason Norris, who anyone who has ever come to the UK, come to London, lives in London, knows he's a staple.
Staying in Europe, the Dutch Waka crew celebrated Matariki on Saturday in the Netherlands. The group organised free activities for the public at Museum Volkenkunde with Waka workshops and waiata. Matt Spencer, who is a part of the group Kiwis in the Netherlands, says the public were enthusiastic about learning about Matariki.
So we had a waiata session, which I think we said would run for like 20 minutes. And I turned around and then like an hour later, they're still going because everyone was just getting so into it. So everyone was really, just engaged and super interested to learn more and had a really fun time as well.
As Aotearoa celebrates the first public holiday steeped in Mātauranga Māori, the hunger for knowledge and to stay connected to their roots grows stronger here and across the globe.
All right, let's get to some of your feedback now on sugary drinks in schools. Shame on all the schools that sell ultra-processed junk, this person says, and at the same time having a healthy food policy. It's not hard, this person says. Schools are controlled environments. Yes, kids will eat elsewhere to and from school, but supporting change has to be systemic, must include high schools. Health begins where we live, learn and play. And this listener says schools are taxpayer funded, as are hospitals. Schools therefore should provide healthy environments. Parents have plenty of opportunity to treat their kids outside of school hours, but school canteens should reflect the health curriculum. This is in response to another petition going to Parliament today calling for a complete ban on sugary drinks across all schools, and they want hard and fast rules on the type of food schools can sell through their tuck shops or provide. This person says definitely time for healthy food and drinks in all schools. In fact, didn't we do this a few years ago? Yeah, feels like it because we're still talking about it. Feels like we go back and forth on this issue when we should have what's best for the kids at heart of the decision, better for their health, mood and education. Interesting, we're talking about slammed primary care like GPs, and then on the other hand we're discussing whether we should be feeding our kids this kind of food and drinks.
RNZ News at 6 o'clock. Good evening, I'm Karen McCarthy. Otago Boys High School is helping police to identify those who shared the video of an assault on a student. 3 people have been excluded after a student was attacked in a school bathroom. Acting Rector Andrew King says the school is also working with NetSafe to remove the video from social media. The victim has returned to school and is being supported. The opposition parties say the government needs to apologise to all New Zealanders who grappled with MIQ, not just Charlotte Bellis. The former COVID-19 minister, Chris Hipkins, has issued a public apology to the journalist for releasing incorrect information about her MIQ case earlier this year. ACT and Nationals say that is the right move, but does not go far enough.
What about the inhumane nature of MIQ overall?
Don't just apologise to Charlotte Bellis. I think the government owes other grounded Kiwis an apology as well.
The High Court in April ruled that the virtual lottery system and narrow emergency criteria infringed on the rights of New Zealanders to return home freely. Some health board members are questioning the dramatic improvement in the seismic capability of Hutt Hospital's main block. A reassessment of the Tonga block found that only the concrete cladding is quake-prone, although it remains at just 15% of the new building standard. Josh Briggs, who's also a Hutt City councillor, told the board the change has done little to reassure the community.
If things can change so drastically already, surely we should be holding on to the lesser rating so that we do the best course of action rather than a lesser course of action and move at a slower pace based on information that may be wrong from the same people that have provided both reports.
Mr Briggs seconded a call for an independent engineering assessment, which was supported by a majority vote. An Auckland vegetable grower is considering culling some of his crop due to rising production costs. Storms have ruined many plants and rising fuel prices are making harvesting machines more expensive to run. Alan Fong from The Fresh Grower says those aren't the only increased costs producers are facing.
Fertilisers between 60 and 80% increase this year, so diesel about up to 25% increase. Our freight rates have gone up.
Alan Fong says he is now experimenting with using less fertiliser to combat costs. A former patient of the Lake Alice Psychiatric Hospital's Child and Adolescent Unit says a compensation ruling by the United Nations Committee Against Torture is important. Hawke's Bay man Malcolm Richards was 15 when he was administered drugs and given electric shock treatment during his 2-month stay at the unit in 1975. The UN committee has ruled he was tortured and should be given appropriate help. Mr. Richards says he has struggled with what happened to him for decades.
I haven't been able to have a life because of my treatment. So for what little time I've got left, I'd like enough redress to actually get past some of the stuff I'm still dealing with and be able to have a life.
The government has 90 days to respond to the ruling. A public transport advocacy group believes the decision to stop the direct train service from Onehunga to central Auckland is idiotic. From Friday, all Onehunga line trains will start and finish at Newmarket Station. Passengers will have to take another train line or a bus to reach Britomart in the CBD. The Public Transport Users Association National Coordinator John Reeves claims Auckland Transport is treating passengers with disdain.
Auckland Transport is a failure for Auckland and for public transport users, and it really needs to be changed. And the senior management, they just need to go. They are faceless and they're not living up to their reputation of being something for the good of the community and good for public transport.
The change will create room for new platforms under the City Rail Link plans. It's 6:04. Mate Ma'a Tonga fans in Otago have come out in full force to rally behind their rugby league representatives before the test matches on Saturday. The men's and women's sides will meet their New Zealand counterparts at Auckland's Mount Smart Stadium. The game will be significant for Mele Havea as her daughter, Elanoa Havea, will make her debut for Tonga. Elanoa's grandfather, Sione Whakalata, says it's a time for celebration.
That means what do you really mean, what do you want to do, and you're all heated up and you're hot and do anything to celebrate.
Republican state officials in the US have told a congressional hearing about the direct pressure Donald Trump put them under to reverse the 2020 presidential election results. The BBC's Barbara Plate-Usher reports.
The committee heard from officials and legislators who resisted relentless pressure from Donald Trump and his allies to take action against alleged voter fraud, for which there was no evidence. But the lies of Mr. Trump and his team sparked harassment, even death threats. And the most compelling testimony came from election workers, a daughter and mother, whose lives had been turned upside down by false claims that they stole votes. Do you know what it feels like to have the President of the United States target you? The older woman asked. Both said they no longer feel safe anywhere.
Canada's members of parliament will be given mobile panic buttons to call police in an emergency amid growing online threats of violence against politicians. The Public Safety Minister, Marco Mendicino, says online comments are increasingly toxic. The BBC's Guy Pitt reports.
The Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, had rocks thrown at him at an election rally in September. Jagmeet Singh, who leads the small leftist party, faced an angry mob last month which called for his death. The Public Safety Minister himself, Marco Mendicino, has received online death threats. He said he hoped the panic buttons or mobile duress alarms, allowing users to summon security or police quickly, could add another layer of safety for MPs and their staff.
In sport, the New Zealand women's 3x3 basketball team will be the underdogs when they face USA in their first game of the World Cup in Belgium tonight. The Americans are the most successful women's team in the history of the World Cup, winning gold at 2 of the 4 tournaments they've attended. The Tall Ferns finished 10th out of 20 teams at the last World Cup in 2019, but coach Justine Reed has high expectations this time.
We have a very tough pool. Our 2 first games, I think, are going to be our toughest. I definitely think we've got a chance to get to the quarterfinal. Of course, our aim is to try and win. I think on any given day, anyone's got the chance to win.
The Tall Blacks 3x3 team lost to France 21-13 earlier today. American great Serena Williams says it would be dishonest to say she did not have doubts over whether she would play top-level tennis again. In her comeback after a year out, Williams earned a win in the first round of the Eastbourne doubles. The 40-year-old, who has not played since retiring injured from her first-round match at Wimbledon last year, says she did wonder if she would ever return.
Absolutely, for sure. I would be dishonest if I said it wasn't, but
Yeah, and now my body feels great. I mean, it's doubles. I'm only playing half of the court, but been doing a lot of training, and so it definitely feels good.
Williams is set to play in the singles at Wimbledon next week after receiving a wild card for the Grand Slam event. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, Simon Morris reviews the new Kiwi movie Nude Tuesday. He wishes he hadn't. Otago composer Anthony Ritchie joins us to announce the winners of this year's Dunedin Youth Orchestra competition, dedicated to the next generation of composers. And Dr. Philip Slavin, Associate Professor of History at the University of Stirling in Scotland, pinpoints the origins of the Black Death on Nights of me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Back to Lisa Owen after the short forecast from Met Service to midnight Thursday. For Northland and Auckland, mainly fine, isolated showers north of Auckland City. Waikato to Wellington, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Fine or becoming fine today, frosts for most places tomorrow morning. Gisborne and the Wairoa district, cloudy with isolated showers, clearing by tomorrow afternoon, fine spells developing. The remainder of Hawke's Bay and Wairarapa, mostly cloudy today, areas of cloud and frost in the morning, then fine. For all the South Island, mostly fine. However, fog or low cloud persisting in a few inland valleys. Frosts in the morning, severe about the high country. Isolated showers for coastal Fiordland tomorrow and possibly northern Buller tomorrow evening. And the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy with the odd shower today and fine spells increasing tomorrow afternoon. It's coming up to 6:09.
Ngā mihi, Karen, no mai hoki mai. This is Checkpoint, ko Lisa Owen tēnei. In a damning report on the police response to the Uvalde school shooting, the Texas Public Safety Director says it was an abject failure. New details have revealed that just 3 minutes after the gunman entered the school, there were enough armed police on site to stop the attacker. CNN's justice correspondent Shimon Prokupex has the latest from Austin.
The law enforcement response to the attack at Robb Elementary was an abject failure.
Tonight, new information detailing a law enforcement response gone horribly wrong. The head of the Texas Department of Public Safety showing a damning and detailed minute-by-minute timeline chronicling the deadly attack that killed 19 children and 2 adults, and laying the blame on Pete Arredondo, the school district's police chief, for the failed response.
3 minutes after the subject entered the West Building, there was a sufficient number of armed officers wearing body armor to isolate, distract, and neutralize the subject.
Colonel Steve McGraw telling Texas lawmakers that 11 officers responded to the shooting and were inside the school by 11:36, within 3 minutes of the gunman entering the school, including School District Police Chief Pete Arredondo. Yet, according to McGraw, they didn't do anything for over an hour at the guidance of Arredondo.
The only thing stopping a hallway of dedicated officers from entering room 111 and 112 was the on-scene commander, who decided to place the lives of officers before the lives of children.
Initially, authorities said the gunman entered 2 adjacent classrooms and barricaded himself behind locked doors. However, McCraw says video from the scene indicates not one of the initial responding officers tried to open either of those doors until moments before they took the gunman down. And it had been unlocked the entire time.
There's no way to lock the door from the inside, and there's no way for the subject to lock the door from the inside.
McCraw revealed the strike plate on the door had been malfunctioning and wouldn't hold the lock. A new image from surveillance footage obtained by the Austin American Statement shows the halls of Robb Elementary at 11:52. At least 3 officers were in the hallway, 2 with rifles and 1 who appears to have a tactical shield. Just 19 minutes after the gunman entered the school.
The doctrine for active shooters is clear. You stop the killing, you stop the dying.
Despite this, they waited in the hallway outside the classrooms and didn't attempt to enter until 12:50 p.m. at the direction of Arredondo, according to McGraw. Arredondo is facing harsh criticism for his alleged lack of action.
We were failed by Pete Arredondo. He failed our kids, teachers, parents, and city.
Standing back a whole hour, leaving them inside with that gunman, is not right. It's cowardly stuff.
In the US, state officials have been testifying about the pressure they were under to help President Donald Trump overturn the 2020 election result. The latest hearing before the House Select Committee into the January 6th insurrection has been told some officials who defied the pressure wound up fearing for their lives. CNN's Manu Raju has been at the hearing.
You're a tyrant, you're a felon, and you must turn yourself in to the authorities immediately.
Tonight, the January 6th committee laying out in stark terms the intimidation and pressure campaign from then President Donald Trump and his allies against state officials who were attempting to uphold democracy in states where Joe Biden won.
What are we going to do? What can you and I do to a state legislator besides kill him?
Trump urging them to reverse the election results, even though he was told repeatedly it was illegal.
And I said something to the effect of, sir, we've done dozens of investigations, hundreds of interviews. The major allegations are not supported by the evidence developed.
Rusty Bowers, the Republican Arizona State House Speaker, testified that Trump, Rudy Giuliani, Congressman Andy Biggs, and others pressured him to decertify Biden's win in his state. Biggs ignored CNN's questions about it. Bowers said Giuliani never provided evidence of their conspiracy theories, even admitting there was none.
And what exactly did he say and how that come up?
My recollection, he said, we've got lots of theories, we just don't have the evidence. And I don't know if that was a gaffe or maybe he didn't think through what he said, and afterwards we kind of laughed about it. But I do not take this current situation in a light manner, a fearful manner, or a vengeful manner. I do not want to be a winner by cheating.
Trump's lawyer, John Eastman, allegedly told Bowers to just replace the electors, even if he did not have the authority.
And he said, just do it and let the court sort it out. And I said, you're asking me to do something that's never been done in history, the history of the United States. And I'm going to put my state through that without sufficient proof.
But Trump pressed on, and the committee revealing his involvement in the Trump campaign effort to send a fake set of electors on January 6th to prevent Congress from certifying Joe Biden's victory.
What did the president say when he called you?
Essentially, he turned the call over to Mr. Eastman, who then proceeded to talk about the importance of the RNC helping the campaign gather these contingent electors in case any of the legal challenges that were ongoing changed the result of any of the states.
Newly revealed text messages from the morning of January 6th show the apparent involvement of GOP Senator Ron Johnson. An exchange between staffers for Johnson and Vice President Pence shows Johnson wanted to give Pence an alternate slate of electors for Michigan and Wisconsin. Pence's staffer responded, "Do not give that to him." Johnson's office contended on Tuesday the senator was unaware of the effort. The pressure campaign extended to Georgia, where Trump's chief of staff texted or called Brad Raffensperger 18 times to set up a phone call where he pressed the GOP election official to find the votes needed to overturn the election.
Why wouldn't you want to find the right answer, Brad, instead of keep saying that the numbers are right? The real truth is I won by 400,000 votes, at least.
Every single allegation we checked, we ran down the rabbit trail to make sure that our numbers were accurate.
Raffensperger described the threats against him and his family after he disputed Trump's fraud claims.
Eventually, my wife started getting the text, and hers typically came in as sexualized texts, which were disgusting. Some people broke into my daughter-in-law's home, and my son has passed, and she's a widow and has 2 kids, and so we're very concerned about her safety also.
Former Georgia election official Wandra Shea Moss testifying about the threats she, her mother, and her son received because of Donald Trump's persistent lies.
Like, be glad it's 2020 and not 1920. I just felt like it was my fault for putting my family in this situation.
Her mother saying her life was in danger.
The FBI informed me that I needed to leave my home for safety. I felt homeless. I felt, I can't believe this person has caused this much damage to me and my family.
It is 17 minutes past 6 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. In news just to hand, an earthquake of magnitude 6.1 has killed at least 255 people in Afghanistan. At least 250 people have been injured amid concerns the toll could rise. The quake struck about 44 kilometres from the Pakistani border at a depth of 51 kilometres. Locals describe feeling long, strong jolts in the capital, Kabul. Shaking was felt by about 119 million people in Pakistan, Afghanistan and India. And photographs on Afghan media show houses reduced to rubble. Floods in India and Bangladesh have killed around 70 people and forced millions of others to leave their homes, many with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Heavy rain is making it hard for rescuers to help those trapped by the rising waters. BBC's South Asia correspondent Yogita Lamai reports.
When the rain relents, rescuers work with the means they have to get people out. In small groups and clusters, hundreds of thousands are still to get to safety. In these rural and remote areas of the Indian state of Assam, it isn't a fast-moving operation. But without it, some would simply not make it. Across the border in Bangladesh, the situation is even worse. This is the gate of a school in Sylhet that was turned into a shelter. If it rains anymore, it will no longer serve as a refuge. Inside, people who've managed to save themselves but lost everything they had. Our home was swept away in the floods. All our belongings have gone too, this woman says. Anger against the administration is growing. Our home was flooded and we've come here for shelter, but we haven't received any relief material yet. We're here without food, she says. Unrelenting rainfall for more than a week caused the flooding. And while this is a common occurrence in these low-lying areas during the monsoon season, Bangladeshi officials say it's the worst they've seen in more than a century. Today, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina surveyed the scale of the disaster that's hit her country. She insists her government is doing all it can. Supplies have reached some areas: food packets, water and medicines. This is Molvi Bazaar to the south of Sylhet. But the threat of more rain remains. And in both countries, most people who've been affected had very little even before the floods hit. They'll need all the help they can get to rebuild their lives.
India's Supreme Court is due to decide whether the government policy of demolishing the homes of Muslims who criticise the government is justified by the country's constitution. The BBC's Rajani Vaidyanathan reports.
In the streets of Saharanpur, a lingering fear. For Muslims in the town, nothing feels safe anymore. Anti-Muslim sentiments growing in India. Targeted in hate crimes, attacked in political speeches. Now, they're afraid the government's coming for their homes. This is what happened to Kushnuders. Bulldozers sent in after her 17-year-old son Abdul was detained. Authorities say they'll demolish illegally constructed homes of those accused of taking part in violent protests. Kushnuda was here with her young grandchildren when the digger showed up without warning.
The children were crying. They were howling. There were lots of police here too. Everyone was scared. The bulldozer was outside and we were in here.
Thousands demonstrated in the town following Friday prayers over a week ago, after a national spokesperson for the Hindu nationalist BJP made offensive remarks about the Prophet Muhammad. A largely peaceful march turned tense. Dozens of Muslim men detained. Asma hasn't seen her son Ali since that day. He's accused of rioting. She says he wasn't even at the protests. But officials have been to inspect her house. She's scared the bulldozers could visit next.
We sacrificed everything to build this house. They came and said it's illegal and threatened to break it down. We are insects for them. They can crush us anytime they want.
It's not just the town of Saharanpur. In recent months, bulldozers have been deployed across India by the governing BJP to crack down on dissent.
The health of the Great Barrier Reef off the east coast of Australia is being used in a legal case trying to stop a major gas project off the coast of Western Australia. The Australian Conservation Foundation argues Woodside's Scarborough gas project could accelerate climate change and in turn damage the famous reef. The ABC's Michael Slezak has more.
Woodside's Scarborough liquefied gas project may sit thousands of kilometres away from the Great Barrier Reef, but the Australian Conservation Foundation says it could doom the World Heritage Site. Kelly O'Shannessy is the foundation's chief executive.
When you burn gas, it creates methane. Methane is one of the most polluting greenhouse gases on the planet.
2 months ago, Woodside was granted major state and federal approvals to kickstart the $16.5 billion project. Because it sits in waters off the coast, its environmental assessment was done by the National Offshore Petroleum Safety and Environmental Management Authority, NOPSEMA, rather than the Federal Environment Minister. However, there's also a clause in the law that offshore projects that are expected to have a significant impact on the Great Barrier Reef should be assessed by the Federal Environment Minister. So the Australian Conservation Foundation, or ACF, has sought a federal court injunction to stall the project while it argues for that to happen.
Well, if successful, the case will set a precedent that all new fossil fuel projects in Australia must be assessed for the climate damage that they could potentially cause if they went ahead.
ACF will argue the project will increase global temperatures by nearly 0.0004 degrees Celsius.
Already at this stage, we are losing vast numbers of corals in bleaching events that are becoming more frequent. So we just haven't got room to increase that temperature anymore.
Dr. Selena Ward is a coral reef scientist at the University of Queensland. She thinks offshore projects should be assessed the same way as onshore ones.
It's absolutely crucial that this case goes ahead and that a precedent is set so that future fossil fuel projects will have to be assessed in the same way. I don't think we can possibly have exemptions. It makes our environmental laws a mockery, really.
The Scarborough project would see gas piped from the gas fields about 375 kilometres off the coast to an expanded processing facility near Karratha. Much of the gas will then be sent overseas. Bill Hare is a scientist with the consultancy firm Climate Analytics.
It's not simply about the emissions, it's also about, are we as a country contributing to the rest of the world meeting the Paris Agreement, which we desperately need the rest of the world to do if we're going to keep our precious assets like the Great Barrier Reef.
A spokeswoman for the Federal Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek says she's unable to comment because the case is before court. In March, Anthony Albanese told ABC Perth he supported the Scarborough project so long as it stacked up environmentally.
In Russia, anyone who wants to show dissent against what Moscow calls the special military operation in Ukraine can face arrest, fines and imprisonment. But that's not scaring everyone. CNN's Fred Pleitgen speaks with an elderly St. Petersburg artist who is using her paintings to send a poignant message.
Yelena Osipova might seem a bit frail, but her will is strong and her creativity seems unstoppable. The 76-year-old artist has been detained for several anti-war protests since Russia began what it calls its special military operation in Ukraine. But when we visited her in her apartment in St. Petersburg, she showed no signs of feeling intimidated, instead complaining that police had taken her posters. They took some away and haven't given them back, although they promised to give them back to me, she says. This has been going on for some time. So she keeps painting more posters, like this one, a bird symbolizing Russia with the writing, "Russia is mourning and Russia is not Putin." It's a repentant bird, she says, a bird in mourning. And there are many such people in mourning here. Yelena Osipova is not afraid to speak out about even the most difficult topics, like the massacre in Bucha, where hundreds of dead bodies were found in the Kiev suburb after Russian forces retreated from there in early April. Ukraine and international investigators have launched investigations into possible war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. Moscow continues to reject its forces were responsible. The very large poster shows dead people with huge, piercing, open eyes, and the text says, "The eyes of the dead will remain open until Russia repents." For me, what was important in this poster is this word, repentance, she says. It was important to me to emphasize it. While some Russians took to the streets to protest Vladimir Putin's special military operation during its early days, authorities have now effectively stopped any larger movement from taking hold, dismantling opposition groups and banning many media organizations not in line with the Kremlin's policies. Yelena Osipova says she understands people's fears. They are afraid of losing their jobs, she says, being expelled from college. And there have been such incidents, even if they see a photo on the internet showing someone holding a Ukrainian flag. That is already grounds for sacking. But Yelena Osipova isn't scared, she says. If the authorities keep taking her protest art, she'll paint more, and even a battalion of riot police won't silence her creative mind.
Organisers of one of Europe's top beauty pageants have updated its rules. After last year facing a lawsuit for rules stipulating the contestants' height and marital status, the entry requirements for the Miss France pageant have been modernised. The BBC's Charlotte Gallagher has more.
Bikinis, requests for world peace, and tough questions like this.
Describe your perfect date.
I'd have to say April 25th, because it's not too hot, not too cold. All you need is a light jacket.
That's actually from the Hollywood film Miss Congeniality, but you get my point. Beauty contests have had their fair share of clichés, and the organisers of one of Europe's most popular beauty pageants, Miss France, have admitted it's time for a change. Until now, contestants had to be 24 or younger, unmarried, and not have any children. But not anymore. Women of any age, marital status, and those who have kids will be allowed to enter. It comes after bosses announced that trans women would also be welcome. Last year, France's equality minister described the pageant's entry requirements as outdated, though some rules do remain. Bad luck if you're under 1.70 meters tall or have any visible tattoos or piercings. You're also not allowed to change your hairstyle during the event.
And that is it from us. The Late News team's going to keep you updated throughout the night. Remember, if you missed anything on the program, you can always find Checkpoint on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts from and have a listen back. Ko te kaupapa tuatahi a pōpō tomorrow from 5 a.m. First up asks Grant Robertson if it's time to change the law and move back into the red setting to ease pressure on the health system. Kaua e wariwari te atatero I a mātou kōrero. Check out our stories and videos online.
In the headlines, Otago Boys High School is helping police to identify those who shared the video of an assault on a student. The opposition parties say the government needs to apologise to all New Zealanders who grappled with MIQ, not just journalist Charlotte Bellis. Lower Hutt's mayor is throwing his support behind a plan to replace Hutt Hospital's quake-prone main block with temporary wooden prefabs. And Foodstuffs is looking to open up its wholesale grocery operation to rival retailers. Those are the headlines. Our